Right. I was just told that my microphone was off. Well, that's fantastic. Um, Turn the Microsoft microphone back on. We should be okay now. Um, Alrighty, let's go back a couple of slides. Welcome, everybody. My name is Benjamin Words. I'm the guy who forgot to turn on the microphone, and I will take you through today's masterclass, which is on scale and culture without breaking it. We're now live, including my microphone, and I'm very happy to see that so many of you have already joined, and no doubt there'll be a few more in the next little while. And first of all, kudos for showing up and investing in yourself. The next hour will be pretty fast paced, and you may hear that I'm a little bit under the weather. But you committed to showing up, and so I figure the least I can do is to show up myself. Of course, it's a proof that I'm a real person. I'm not some AI avatar. And one of the key questions for the next hour will be, will my voice last? So let's find out together. So we're going to talk about the 5 forces that affect any organization's culture and people during phases of high growth. And the question is it still relevant if you're not currently going through, let's say, 30 or 50% headcount growth every 12 months? And the answer is absolutely, because that's capitalism, right? Every organization is trying to grow as fast as possible. So either the organization is working towards scaling up, or it's in the middle of it, or it has gone through the scale-up phase and is probably still dealing with the fallout, and people are wondering, how did we get here? And so I know going through the scale-up phase, one of the top concerns, especially of heads of people and culture, is, well, how can we keep the culture the same as we're growing up, or at least how can we keep the good parts? And we need to be clear on this, right? The culture of any organization that's going through high growth is going to change. There's no way to keep it the same. And that's good, right? Because you can't really be operating with 500 people the way you operated when you were still 50. But we can be deliberate about what are we willing to give up in our culture right now as we're going through this next phase, as well as what are the good things that we want to keep, and how can we keep them? And so that's what today is about. So these are the goals and effectively my commitments to you. Right? If you're about to scale, then you're going to learn a lot about the struggles ahead and hopefully understand, what makes the organization special and what do you want to keep? Because by the time you go through the scale-up phase, it still should be an organization that you want to work in. You feel like you belong, and you feel like you're with people who appreciate you. But there's a lot of rocks in the way that can unfortunately create a bit of a struggle there. Anyone who is currently going through the scale-up phase, you probably feel like you're struggling a little bit in one way or another. So hopefully you can learn a lot about what it takes to survive and how you can survive and come out of this phase all right, and ultimately have this result in an organization that you're proud of, and that you look back on this phase with pride in terms of what you've done, because this scale up phase will ultimately create and set the culture for so many years and so many people to come, thousands of people. And so, you don't want to be looking back at this with resentment. And then, of course, once you have already scaled, there is lots and lots of things today that are probably going to explain some of the challenges that you're experiencing, and lots of ways in which you can make your life easier. So I promise to you that you'll gain insights that will make your life easier. The next hour that you're going to invest, or 45 minutes now, you're going to get them back many times over, no matter what stage you're at. Alrighty, so is going to be fast-paced, and I know how hard it can be to sit in one of these master classes, to feel energized by learning a lot, but then to feel pretty alone afterwards when it comes to applying what you've learned. And my commitment to you is that I am happy to jump on a call with you to dive a level deeper, take some of the things that you may have found too high level and see how we can apply them for you. And I will share the details on how you can book a call with me at the end of this session. So, who am I, and why am I taking time to share all of that? So I've been in the tech ecosystem for over 15 years now, across the US, the UK, and Australia. I founded a few companies myself, so I know what it's like to be a founder, and I'm going to talk about founders later on, and what it's like to work with them and why it's sometimes so hard. But I've also worked in leadership and exec roles in startups and scale-ups, and spent time in organizations that had, no doubt, world-class cultures like Atlassian, Google, and Culture Amp, a few others that you may recognize. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people with good intentions get it terribly wrong, and become part of creating, sustaining, or changing a good culture into a toxic culture through a lot of toxic behavior. And it's hurting people in those organizations, and it's hurting the ecosystem. And therefore, it affects all of us. And so equally, I've seen these world-class cultures and the patterns that the companies that ultimately manage to achieve a well-recognized positive culture and fast and sustainable growth, they're doing a few things consistently that keep the good parts of their culture while they're navigating this fast growth. And so this shouldn't be rocket science, because some of the things are actually pretty straightforward to do once you know what they are. In terms of my experiences in Scaleup, so I've worked with over 60 organizations in my career. Part of that was as a consultant, and that includes probably 20 odd Scaleups. And in fact, for CPO, CTO type roles in startups and Scaleups, I was sort of at the top level, working directly with the founders and being part of creating or changing the culture. I've also launched products that ultimately generated $100 million and added a lot of growth. And I led teams, for example, through 6 weeks of, you know how it is sometimes in setups and scale-ups, cash flow, it can be erratic. 6 weeks of people not getting paid. And I'm happy to say that we didn't lose anyone during that time. And there was a very, very deliberate approach we took to the culture a long time before that happened that actually helped us get through this rough patch with everyone. Also managed to inherit teams and turn them into ultimately the highest engaged teams into an organization. So we're going to talk a lot about what it takes to actually keep people engaged and keep them on the positive side. Sometimes we see these statistics about high engagement results in increased productivity, and I can 100% back that. In a lot of the cases, I managed to inherit a team, increase engagement and increase productivity by about 30% without adding any headcount. And so one of my big passions that resulted out of this journey is turning individual contributors into leaders and even leaders of leaders. And so that led me today to run Scalable Leaders, which is a growth and support system for leaders in tech. And it's founded on a very simple belief that anyone, no matter if they're in a technical function or otherwise, can be a capable leader. And we've got the track record to show for taking quite junior people and turning them into leaders very quickly, or even turning around low performers and turning them into leaders of leaders in a very short amount of time. So we partner with HR teams, and we often get told how much we made their life easier, because instead of operating like your stock standard course, 1 day or 10 weeks or whatever, we started offering unparalleled flexibility, which means people can work their leadership development sessions around their personal and professional commitments, which means it's inclusive, but also there's literally no excuse not to engage in growing yourself, because we run sessions which people can pick and choose from every week at different times, even outside of working hours, with a very extensive curriculum. It covers all aspects of leadership, but also commercial acumen. We're offering lots of sessions every week for people to bring their challenges from work and discuss and even role play difficult conversations. So they have a safe space to explore these things, what they're struggling with, which on one side eases the load of the HR team in having to handhold, but also in terms of cleanup, because people get to practice these things before they burn relationships, just because they didn't know any better. And a couple of other things that make Scalable Leaders special is just a really supportive community that's available 24/7 for any leader, as well as I think we're pretty much the only program that's tailored for people in tech and tech organizations to learn about leadership and commercials. And we just know all of our facilitators have been through startups and scale-ups and tech companies, and know what that constant pressure to innovate is like, and how we might need to adapt our leadership approach a little bit to those challenges. And so people can pick sessions every week from our schedule, and the people and culture teams that we work with, they then get insights into how engaged someone actually is in their growth journey, what sessions and topics they're focused on, so they can guide those conversations as well without having to handhold themselves. So we're very lucky that some really great organizations have partnered with us, like Culture Amp, fast-growing scale-ups like Fresh Clinics, and for-purpose organizations like Good on You, which does amazing things in the sustainability space. And through our community, and we hear from executives as well as individuals who are aspiring to be leaders, we hear lots and lots of scale-up stories every week from the leaders and the HR teams. And so we just know what that scale-up journey is like, and I'm sure you're going to identify with a couple of these things. Like, initially, there's a whole bunch of excitement around scale-ups, right? And that fast growth. And all the opportunities and impact that can come with it. But then it's also really easy to be scared, because a lot of people are going to embark on this journey having never gone through it, right? And there's constantly new challenges that people feel not prepared for. And let's face it, they're struggling, and there is real legal ramifications that come from someone getting it pretty wrong, just because they didn't know any better. And so we know, especially in people and culture teams, that is a challenge, because you're already overworked, budgets are really tight. And so then having to deal with a lot of that excitement, and there's also fear, and sort of these really strong emotions, just adds to the workload, and adds to it's very easy to end up with just a lot of firefighting, especially as things change so quickly. And so then, it'd be nice if we could just add a little bit more capacity. But of course, budgets are still really tight, especially if an organization isn't exactly profitable or cash flow positive just yet. And so it makes you feel just really underappreciated for all the hard work that you're trying to put in to then have the budgets, and to always having to say no to things. And people think you're the problem, when actually it's the system, and it's just the difficult phase of a scale up that you're going through. And especially, again, in people and culture teams, the question comes up as well, who's actually looking after me? And chances are you're reporting to a founder who should be looking after you as, the CEO or whatever in an organization, who's so much part of the culture as well. But they're not necessarily the most capable managers themselves, because they've never done anything like this, and they have to grow in so many organizations. And so often what you just get back from them is, well, you need to be more commercial. So it's a tricky space. And there's a truth that we just have to acknowledge here. And that truth is that being a leader in a scale-up, especially in HR, is one of the hardest jobs you can find. And I've seen it so many times, I've heard it so many times from other people. In many ways, the role that we're going through, with the fast pace, with the founder managers who are not really managers, and with the tight budgets but the really huge ambitions, it's unreasonable. And often, especially as the first person, and sometimes the only person in your function, you have to build everything from scratch, and you have to teach the founders and the people around you what actually good practices for your function looks like, and what it takes for your function to be set up for success. And it's just really easy to feel hopeless. But what I will say, and what this session is about, is if you can understand the forces that are at work, and if you can communicate them to the founders and to everybody else as well, it just becomes so much easier, right? If we have awareness, if we can label things, if we can understand the problem, then we can work it. And so I will say also, being a leader in a scale-up is just one of the most important jobs, and one of the most impactful jobs, because we're part of setting the culture for thousands of people to come. We will be part of this organization in the future. And someone who writes about that journey yeah, really well is, for example, Patty McCord, who used to be the chief people officer at Netflix. And there's lots of lessons learned in there on how she worked with a founder, but also how she created a really cool culture for Netflix. Doesn't necessarily apply to everybody else, but yeah, lots of lessons learned there. But it really shows the impact as well. So let's discover the 5 forces that shape the culture in scale-ups and in pretty much every other organization as well. And to do that, we need to bring it first back to first principles. Okay, so a question that maybe doesn't need asking, but just to level us all on the same sort of language is, what is organizational culture? And of course, we could be talking here about the values and the norms, the rules, the policies, the mission, the processes, the rituals. Yep, all that shapes the culture. But also I will say, well, these are the theoretical and slightly idealistic bits, right? So they have only limited impact on how people really feel and how they experience the culture. And so what I'd like you to do is reflect a little bit on what actually makes the organization that you're part of right now, or that you have been part of recently, what makes it feel special? Why was it, hopefully it was a good culture, why was it a good culture? And so when we usually hear things like how supportive people are, how generous they are with their time, how people are having fun, and how it's just an environment where people are allowed and are just very creative with ideas, and so innovation comes easy. And maybe we hear things as well about people being just very customer focused and how everyone rallies around that, and how it's a place that just feels very psychologically safe and is therefore very inclusive, and where talent from diverse backgrounds can strive. So these are the things that we usually hear. And well, of course, all the values and norms are part of it. What then really shapes the culture and how people experience is the behaviors of people in that organization, especially the behaviors of leaders. And it's the behaviors of leaders that often then get perpetuated. I like to think of this as, like how we learned as children, right? We looked around us, saw what other people did, what's acceptable, we got told what's not acceptable. And in many ways, that's a habit that we carry on throughout our life. If we're starting to go into a different culture, we go traveling, etc., right? This part of our brain doesn't just suddenly switch off because we're adults. And so a really great example of that is what's called the desire path, right? So think of yourself as the person who spent so much effort paving designing and paving the sidewalk and where people should walk, and this would be great and it looks nice. But if people don't have time, patience, or the emotional resilience to actually go through the paths that you've designed for them, they'll start to look for shortcuts. And if one person does it and it's okay, then especially if it's a leader, then other people will follow. And suddenly this new path exists. No matter what the culture was designed as, this is the path people choose. And so this is a metaphor, this picture, right? For little things like whether people put their dishes away, whether they just leave them in the sink piling up, for, well, who exactly to clean up for them, right? There's no mom in the office. And hopefully that doesn't end up being you. But also how messy it is when people are in conflict, and how they hire and promote and consider other people for promotion. And so then the next question begs to ask, what affects people's behavior? Of course, it's thoughts and feelings. And in scale-ups in particular, the 2 strongest drivers generally are what people hope to gain. And so in scale-ups, this can be promotion, status, wealth through stock options, etc., prestige and recognition for this company becoming a household name and them having been part of building it. The impact that it has for its customers and maybe the world at large, the learning that can come from this journey, the responsibilities they may gain over time through the organization and the role growing. And also that this just is a place that appreciates me for me and that I feel like I belong to. Now, on the flip side, one of the drivers or key driver is the fear of loss, right? And so, of course, especially these days, fear of losing one's job or career trajectory, at least, fear of losing options, fear of no longer being part of this company that a lot of people, when they join a company and are part of it for a while, they identify with it. And they identify with a culture. And so no longer being part of it then also comes with, well, maybe feeling not good enough, having imposter syndrome, and having fear of missing out, of no longer being part of this amazing journey and all the things that are to come. So especially with neurodivergent talent, which we have a lot of in tech, and people from marginalized groups and people who are already had to deal with trauma in their lives, these emotions can be running really high. And of course, we can design things that help drive more the positive emotions we hope to gain through LTIs and ownership and all sorts of things, and psychological safety and so forth. But because things are moving so fast and so much change, it can on a very regular basis trigger people and have these emotions running high. And so the question is, what can we do about it to have more positive behaviors and less negative behaviors or toxic behaviors? And so that's where the 5 forces come in. We're going to build this model together. Force number 1 is the pressure to grow. And so that might seem logical, right? Well, there's pressure to grow, of course, like we need to take action. It's going to affect our behaviors, but let's break this down a little bit further. The pressure to grow is often coming from outside. So why does this exist? It's when we raise a round of funding, for example, it's day one for investors. It's the end of the journey for the founders and like everybody else who's been there, right? We worked up and wow, we just raised, I'll call it $50 million, right? That's awesome. And we made it, but also it's day one for the investors, right? And they are now on the clock to return, let's just call it 10 times the amount they invested to their investors. And so there is a lot of pressure to not leave the money in the bank for too long, but to actually deploy the capital that was raised so that this organization can grow as fast as possible. Yeah, it's not personal, it's just capitalism. And so it's the system we're all part of. And often there are also, as part of the raise, legal instruments in place to put a little bit of pressure on the founders to drive that growth in the organization as fast as possible. And of course, through stock options or stock and equity, etc., the founders are very much incentivized in similar ways to the investors in any case. Now, sometimes we get internal drivers as well. Just, we're in a race with a competitor. We want to outpace them. We want to land grab, or we need to become cash flow positive as fast as possible. So the founders regain a little bit of control over that organization. But this results in just that pressure to deploy whatever capital is available and to hire really fast, right? So we can achieve those goals. And so that can be not uncommon, adding 50% headcount to an organization within 12 months, and then trying to do that again, 50%, the year after. And so that creates some rush to create the JDs and go through the hiring process. And when we don't know any better, often one of the first things that happens is we're going to drop the standards on hiring. And we're abandoning sort of our culture fit standards because, well, we have really ambitious targets. We need someone who's capable, who's been there and done that. And so let's not pay attention too much on whether they're culture fit. And, we're going to throw terms around like, well, we want someone who's a culture add. And of course, everything is going to change and they're going to bring in a lot of best practices and everything. So we make all sorts of excuses and sort of get swayed also by the accomplishments of someone. And so then, of course, that leads to tension between the old talent and the new talent. And so increased friction, more discussions, more going in circles sometimes. And so the hiring alone for 50% headcount growth can add about 10% extra workload for each leader. And I'm going to refer to sort of the increases in workload a little bit throughout the presentation. And these are, of course, rough estimates, but I wanted to break down the math just to show that that is credible. And so let's quantify the workload just for that one task of adding 50% headcount growth. We're not going to talk about still hitting your targets in your function. We're not going to talk about external recruiters and talent acquisition people and all these sort of things and onboarding. We're just going to talk about this. So let's just say we're an organization of 100 people and we have 20 leaders in the business that are going to be responsible for the hiring, at least for the most part. Let's just assume they're going to work 40 hours a week. And so it's not uncommon in scale-ups because of the amount of change and how people who used to be great are maybe no longer a fit or maybe prefer not to be part of this organization at this stage. Let's say we've got 20% attrition. So to add 50% headcount growth, we need to hire 70 people, right? Because we're going to lose 20. Now, what does it take to hire 70 people? It depends on your hiring process, of course. But I'm going to go with some optimistic estimates and say, well, just writing a JD, putting it out there, and having CVs flow in. Let's just say that takes, combining everyone in the organization who's part of it, 2 hours. Scanning the 300 CVs or so that everyone gets these days when they put something live on LinkedIn, and filtering this down to sort of the, let's say, 10 candidates you want to interview. Let's say that only takes 2 hours as well. And so let's just say we have 3 rounds of interviews or 3 stages of interviews per role. We're probably going to have 2 interviewers. We're probably going to make time for an hour. If we interview 10 candidates in the first round, that amounts to about 20 hours. 5 candidates in the second round, that's 10 hours. 3 candidates in the last round, that's 6 hours. And then, of course, we need to coordinate all these interviews and the decisions and the feedback. And let's say that takes only 2 hours. And then we have a final chat and the negotiation and the contract and, and then the onboarding on the first day. Let's just say that's a couple of hours each as well. So by that time that person is here on their seat, we've spent 46 hours at least per hire. Now, that's a lot of time, and we have to multiply that by 70. So that means if you average it over the year, per those 20 leaders, per leader, they're going to spend about 4 hours a week, so 10% of their 40-hour week in extra time just filling the seats. That's a huge amount of time. And in fact, if you need to speak to commercially to your CEO, to whoever, translate that into money, and you will find it's probably, I'd be surprised if you get away with less than $10,000 cost per hire to make that work. So extra workload, right? And in fact, it then leads us to the second force. Well, once we have the new hire, we need to go through norming. And you're probably familiar with this concept. When you add someone to a team, that team goes through the forming, storming, norming, and performing again, right? Especially if it's a new leader that we've hired. And so all the hires, new hires, they need to understand the goals, the people, the systems, the culture, of course, and get ready to perform. So it goes much beyond, when we say onboarding, it goes much beyond sort of filling out the forms and making sure we've got an emergency contact. Part of one second. Part of this norming process. Thank you. Getting some support here, but the door is tricky. All right. So part of the reason the culture is about to change is new people have their own ways of working, right? And we need to discuss whether we even need to adopt those new ways of working or still keep the old ones. And we either need to get the new person on board or we need to get the existing talent on board and all these things. Now, so onboarding, of course, we might have some rework. We might also have some adjusting of ways of working, and so it gets a little difficult, right? Again, we have that tension, the amount of discussion that's going to slow us down, and the onboarding itself from which is not just the role of the leaders of the HR function, but everyone in the team is part of explaining to that new person, no, we're doing it this way because of that, and so forth, right? Or here's where you find the documentation, here's how we do things, oh, by the way, you should be part of that meeting. So everyone is part of it, and it adds about 7% of additional workload to everyone. Now, if as part of this process we're secretive, or we haven't considered or we haven't chosen internal talent, and then there's this friction with this new leader, we're going to get doubt in and distrust in the hiring decisions in the whole hiring process, right? So I see a lot of organizations over-index on let's get external leaders in who've been there and done it, as opposed to investing in internal talent. And so that can also then generally just lead to a little bit of disengagement, but also distrust, and increased tension, and of course then less willingness maybe to really invest in onboarding of the new person because, well, why are they here in the first place? So it can lead to some really funny dynamics in the team. Of course, we could just say people grow up. That's the reality. But people have feelings and they may be butthurt, and that happens a lot in Scaleup. So rightly or wrongly is just what happens. So, and that's, by the way, that's if we really focus on onboarding and do it well. I see a lot of organizations as well where onboarding hasn't really been thought through, and it doesn't really happen. And so it's not like that means it's less effort. It just means there's even more tension between the old and new talent. We pay for it either way. So at this point, we need to talk about founders, right? Because founders are a big part of the norming process. I mean, they started things. They essentially are the culture in many ways, at least in the early days. And I think, having been a founder, I'm happy to admit that founders can be the most unreasonable people to work for and with. And the reason for that is, well, we usually have really sky-high expectations of everyone, including ourselves. Very little skill to actually live up to those expectations and to manage people accordingly and get the best out of them. And then because of the pace of the business, the founders have to go through so much growth themselves, and that means they spread their time and their learning very thinly across so many different things, and including learning about how to be a good manager. It's often not front of their mind, and learning about how to set a people and culture function up for success also not on their mind. And so founders should definitely not get a free pass, right? Because they're going to have this huge impact on the organization. And they need to be part of this norming process of leaders and level up their own leadership style to give up the things that just aren't helpful and do more of the, and show and demonstrate more of the behaviors that we want to see from all leaders. So they are part of shaping a culture. And so you usually have two of them. And I find this really helpful to be aware of. And whenever I talk about this with other people, they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So you're going to have, let's call them a type A founder, someone who is visionary, creative, impulsive, and disruptive. They are the ideas person. And without them, there's no innovation. And they're a little bit like the magician in the office, right? They'll say, well, we're building a rocket to the moon. And meanwhile, you're in the back trying to explain to people why there's no budget for a coffee machine or something. So they think big. And they usually get balanced by someone who's much more the follow-through person. So the type B, they are calm, they're focused on execution, they're consistent, they're making sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, and without them, it's chaos. And so organizations get into a real tipping point in terms of culture if one founder leaves. Now, of course, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 founders, but those two, that balance is key, and they're like yin and yang. And so if one of them leaves, it means you need the rest of the leadership and executive team to step up to replace them, which is really challenging. If you ever get into that kind of situation, ping me and let's talk it through, because I've seen founders who leave sort of hire 6 people to replace themselves with, and each of the replacements got kicked out one by one because the other founder just didn't trust them. So it's a really funny dynamic. Now, founders And everybody else then is subject to force number 3, which is change. So we're evolving as an organization, right? And so we're going to have a new strategy. We're going to have a new org design. We're going to have new expertise on ways of working, right? And so talked a little bit about that in norming as well. But if we're deciding to adopt new ways of working rather than norm someone into the current way of doing things, then we are driving change. And the change in Scaleups is often so fast that by the time you finish a presentation slide about the new work structure, it's already outdated. Because either someone quit or someone new hired, or actually we've got different thinking now, we've got different goals. So it can be exhausting. And so, of course, there can be a lot of tension in regards to, well, what's the best way of working? If we have to change, all right, but what's the best way? Do we actually have to change right now? And influencing that decision, a lot of people, because the change is so exhausting and they can't take it anymore, they want to keep things the way they are. And so there's then resistance and lots more arguing, and it's really bringing that tension that we talked about earlier between old and new. It's really bringing that to life. And sometimes, unfortunately, people argue for not changing, even though they would benefit from the change. But they can't see the forest for the trees anymore because there's so much change going on. And so just being part of that change, just keeping up with it, I found it's about at least an hour a week of just catching up as an individual contributor who's not driving any change right now, just catching up on what everybody else is doing, right? What has sales changed? What is support changing, marketing, the engineering function, operations, etc. So easily an hour a week, just catching up with it, just trying to stay up to date with all the changes going on in a Scaleup. And so that is so exhausting that a lot of people then try to avoid owning change and the change management, right? Because it's so high risk, and because what you're trying to advocate for is has so many dependencies of so many other fast moving projects, that is just really challenging. So people might advocate for change. That's the other side of the coin, but don't want to own it. So, and there we get to force number 4, which is the workload. And we touched on it throughout, right? Like driving the growth and putting bums on seats, the norming process, the change management process, all that adds to the workload. And I would estimate that it's about 20% of time just to accommodate the growth for leaders. So that's 1 day a week that goes out of a leader's time of driving towards like achieving targets and just accommodating growth and putting bums on seats and everything. So that's huge, right? That's time that's otherwise not spent on pushing the organization forward. And so that means, they still have to achieve their targets. The targets aren't getting lowered. Again, the joys of capitalism. That means there's just less discretionary time for leaders to invest in people and relationships and culture. And in fact, not just in leaders, but everybody else. So investments into culture suffer. And so what I've seen happening is when the CEO announces some new high pressure targets that people know and already overwhelmed and overworked, says let's double revenue this quarter or this year, then people are starting to prompt ChatGPT and say, well, how do I politely say I'm overwhelmed without sounding like I'm a quitter? But yeah, it is exhausting, and so we start seeing a lot of ruthless prioritization. Right, and again, that often then goes at the expense of people and good, relationships and cultural rituals, and people just go into a survival mode. And because there is this pressure on achieving results, there is a focus on achieving results, no matter how, and we're seeing a lot of knee-jerk reactions. So it's all these forces putting pressure on the behavior, and that then leads to force number 5. When you are under this much pressure and so much change and so much workload, and having to hit targets and nobody giving you a break, good behaviors and people with good intentions start showing stress behaviors. And so we get to toxic stress, right? A little bit of stress is good, right? A little bit of stress when we're capable, when we know what we're doing, it can make us more alert. It can help us, just get things done. But toxic stress is really weighing people down, and is having all sorts of impact. And before we even get to the physiological impacts of toxic stress, the first things we're going to see is knee-jerk reactions, and so this stress happens because of that pressure to achieve more on the workload and just having less human experiences that are just a result of everyone trying to cope. But yeah, you're gonna get imposter syndrome getting triggered, right? Like, am I really good enough to achieve all of that? I've never done it. I don't know. Even if I have done it, it's like, this is a different organization, different culture. And we'll see with a lot of leaders in particular, the wheels coming off. And they may have been fine before, but with a lot of things that are happening, they're starting to show behaviors and increased friction and problems in their team that just didn't exist before. And so these stress behaviors then also lead to, and stress leads to selfishness, people putting themselves first, not the team and not the organization, and habitual decisions where, well, we've always done it like that, let's just keep doing it like that, and not thinking, well, is there maybe a new context? And so it opens up strategic risks. And of course, that is creating an environment that people don't enjoy working in, and as far as they can, a lot of them will take an early exit. So we're going to see increased attrition and firefighting for HR, and in fact for everybody else as well, because with increased attrition, it means, well, someone's got to cover for the person who just left. The targets don't get lowered because we lost a person, and so everyone else again is trying to keep up with the workload, and so that makes things even worse. So it already sounds exhausting, doesn't it? And like a situation you don't really want to be in. But unfortunately, it's a very, very easy path to take for a lot of the scale-ups in high growth environments. Now, the real problem then starts when we get into vicious cycles, right? So because we've got this attrition, you got to cover for people who've left, and we get even more pressure to achieve our targets because there's no way out. The investor invested, what did we say, 50 million, right? They got to 10x that. So it gets worse, right? And we're going to pay for the dropping productivity. People are trying to overexert themselves. They're going to be even more stressed. We're going to drop the hiring standards further. There's even more tension. Somehow we realize, well, this system isn't working. Let's drive more change, which creates even more workload. And so it's very easy to end up in a spiral. It can feel like you're trying to fix the car while speeding down the highway, and unfortunately the founder and investor sit in the back seat sort of shouting faster when it feels like a near-death experience already. So and of course, when we look at this is not the kind of organization that we would want to be part of either, right? And so we're getting to now the question of what can we do about it? How can we avoid lowering the culture fit? How can we, avoid constantly adjusting the culture rituals and then getting to the attrition and the increase the hiring and everything, and missing targets that then create further pressure? So the patterns that I've seen in scaling culture without breaking it, and that, by the way, means not just breaking the culture, but if we don't want to break the culture, it means we want to avoid breaking the people, right? And their behavior. And so there's a few consistent patterns that I've seen. So we need a different lens on this, right? The question becomes, where do the forces have the biggest impact on people's behavior, so that we can look at the, cure the causes rather than the symptoms, and where can we be proactive? And so the solution isn't to hire this one person who's meant to be a change agent and nobody knows what they actually do, but they use phrases like synergy and transformational growth, and everyone else just wants the aircon fixed. So we need to look at the capability and confidence gaps. And we don't necessarily need to look at them as like, oh, well, we don't have someone who's capable and confident, so therefore we bring someone else in, because if we over-index on those external hires, we're in trouble, as we've seen. we also need to look at capacity gaps, right? Especially in the people and culture functions, because they're going to be the first ones that are affected by a drive to hire, and the last ones that are going to be affected by people leaving and causing trouble and by the toxic stress. So it starts and ends with us. Then there's, of course, the tension between the old and the new, and the further we go down that spiral, the more that increases, and the more that increases the drive to change as well. And so in my mind, we need to, and in my experience, we need to recognize that actually going through this high growth phase is all about learning, right? We're trying to learn how to acquire more revenue and how to operate as a bigger company with more functions and more diversity. And we can either learn or we can stagnate, right? And nobody goes into scale-ups for stagnation, because also stagnation is unacceptable because it doesn't drive growth. So our only chance really is to embrace learning and embed it in the culture. And if you're thinking about what can we keep, we need to add to our culture, no matter whether it exists right now or not, it's that focus on coaching and learning and embracing that and knowing that everything is an experiment. We're going to try 10 different things. Maybe 3 will succeed. That's okay. And we're not going to go too hard on people that, or projects that just didn't succeed. It's all about learning, right? There is no guarantee of success here, but we're going to hire the best people we can to experiment, to learn, and to share that learning with other people under them. So, we always have a succession plan, onboarding and all these other things come easy and so forth. So that culture of coaching and learning, it affects everything. And so that, of course, then means we need to focus on L&D for the current and for the future leaders. We're growing so fast that there's constantly going to be new opportunities for people to step up as leaders. And I believe that leadership doesn't just mean you have reports, but you can be a leader and you can show leadership in an organization without having any reports. And so we need to invest in the people that are visible and that people are going to look for when it comes to what's acceptable as a behavior and what isn't. That's really our only chance. Of course, sometimes it means we need to create budgets, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. L&D and coaching and learning, it can't really exist without budgets. Of course, you can send people to YouTube or to other things, but just watching a bunch of videos or reading a bunch of blogs is not going to really drive that much change in behaviors or make people more capable to handle these stressful situations. So that's step number 1. Now, in terms of capacity gaps, of course, we ideally get to hire before the rush, before the capacity gaps is too much. And that's going to be constant tension with the founders in terms of where do we spend the budget. But I'm a big advocate for in HR teams and the people and culture functions. And we need to hire before the rush, because ultimately the HR function is generally there to guide everybody. Right. And if HR is playing catch up, then everyone else is playing catch up even more so. And so whether it's talent teams, whether it's people partners, those are things that ideally get established and that get some runs at learning on how to do this in an organization before it gets real for everybody else. And of course, that can then also be part of creating a scalable and a self-serve toolbox for everybody else. So so that HR team doesn't get pecked with requests, with questions, with needing to handhold people all the time. Now, in terms of the tension between the old and the new, there is a very simple solution in my experience, and that's to promote from within as far as you can, and to not over-index too much on external hires. I'm not saying no to external hires, but if I look at the large and the famous tech companies, there's still lots of people there who are there, for 5 or 10 years, who are in leadership positions. They know what it's like, and they can perpetuate the good bits of the culture that they appreciated, and they will show so much more loyalty towards that organization. And they become very fierce protectors of the good bits of the culture if they've been given the chance to step up and that support and that trust, right? It is a two-way street of what you give people and what you get back. And so I truly believe that even if you look at someone and they may not be as capable as a potential external hire you can make from a leadership assessment point of view, they know so many other things about how to operate in this organization. You don't need to onboard them as much to this organization and how it works. And so they have lots more capacity and headspace to invest in themselves as leaders and invest in that skill than if you bring in someone external who may be a good leader in a different, at least they were in a different context, and then having that person invest all the time in learning the basics of how this organization works. So you're not really, from the math that I've run, you're not really saving much in hiring an external leader, except if the gap is really large between internal and external hires. You pay for training either way, right? Someone's got to invest the time. It's just a different area that they need to invest in. And so that then also helps with that increased drive to change. The existing team they don't have the drive to change as much, and that can be a good thing. There are areas where you're gonna hit bottlenecks, and where maybe the existing team and the people you promoted from within don't know what the right solution looks like. But hey, there's so many consultants out there, and from experience, it can be really helpful to have an external consultant drive that change, because change is hard, and your leaders from within, you're not necessarily going to risk their relationships and their reputation if little things go wrong. If you can hire an expert to drive that change, and the expertise to drive a particular change in a particular area, like changing a CRM system to something new, or changing development processes, etc. That's not expertise you're going to need on an ongoing basis. So there's a real case to be made here to have those things taken care of by external people. So those are some of the actions that we can take. Now, of course, scalable leaders can help with the heavy lifting on most of those things. And we've got the case studies to show for as well. But whether you choose to partner with us or not, I want you to have a think about the difference of being reactive to that cultural change that's going to happen either way, into the growth and to the 5 forces, and just whenever there's an issue, let's look at it, because there's going to be new hires that are going to dilute the culture, external hires in particular. There's going to be increased tension, constant firefighting, resentment, and vicious cycles. It's very easy to get into that. Whereas when you're proactive and when you're trying to get ahead of it, it's always easier. The internal hires, they usually strengthen and fiercely defend the good parts of the culture. There's reduced tension, less toxic stress, more loyalty towards the organization, and sustainable growth. And isn't that the organization that is proactive in preventing sort of the toxic stress and everything accumulating that we would want to work in, and that other people would want to work in, and that's going to attract the better talent. So I know some of you may be thinking that, well, that all sounds great, but we don't have budgets. It's not going to happen. We're too busy right now. Or we don't have a problem, at least not yet. And I know how it is with budgets and times and scale-ups. It's a little bit like socks in the laundry. You had 2, but somehow one just disappeared. Except in this case, it's, I don't know, $50,000 that went to unexpected cloud costs. Or this person went on extended leave and somehow we had to cover and we didn't have time for everything else. And so the question is, what's the solution? Again, we're going to pay for it either way. We can be running this annual leadership development day for people, but let's face it, we've all been in school, right? If you're trying to cram for a whole day just before an exam, your learning is not going to be as good as if you do it in small increments every week, right? And exercise is going to be the same. If you don't exercise for 3 months, you don't want to be running a marathon to make up for it. And the small sustainable sessions are going to cause much less stress on people's bodies and mental health and so forth. And you also don't want to be everybody's best paid friend, right? By just being there and hand-holding everyone, because you've got your own practice and projects to worry about, and you want to be creating things in your function that you're proud of. And it's not going to happen if you're too over empathetic with everyone, and let them sort of take you for a ride. So if you're struggling with a business case, by the way, on this, I can help you with that too. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're very lucky with some of the organizations that partnered with us and that have embraced sort of learning and scaling themselves and the organization with scalable leaders. And I think the best thing that I've heard about us is sort of the last one on the bottom, about how scalable leaders made the life easier of head of people and culture in a scale up. Because of how we operate, because of what Scaleup is has done to the founders. Not to the founders, to the leaders in that organization. Now, in terms of the cultural change and the forces at work and everything, I know we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg today. And if you're navigating the scale-up journey for the first time, it's hard and things are going to go wrong, and it's okay. But often unfairly, the finger sort of does get pointed at the people and culture function, even by CEOs who didn't understand the first thing about how to set this function up for success and the role that they need to play in making it all work. And so the worst thing you can do for yourself is to try and go at it alone. And so I've got a small group, and I'm partnering with a few select people and culture people to go through this journey together and to learn about how to work with the different founder types and how to scale culture without breaking it. But it's only a small group of people I can support at any one time, because I'm not charging for this time. And so I'm just partnering with people where we both feel like it's a true value add. And to find out, we need to jump on a call. So I promised you the link to my calendar where you can book me, and you can also scan it with your phone. If you've made it this far, I know you're going to get a lot of value out of a conversation, and so feel free to book a time. We'll have a chat about your goals for the next 12 months. We're going to have a chat about your current challenges, do a brief assessment of your team and the culture around you, and work out the best way forward. Even if that doesn't involve scalable leaders, I'm still happy to help you. And again, if you're struggling with business cases as well, I'm happy to help you with that too. Now, that pretty much wraps it up for us. So thank you so much for joining, for investing in yourself, for learning about the challenges and scale-ups, and for trying to scale your culture without breaking it. It's really, really important for not just your organization, but for the ecosystem and the people in it. And so that's my commitment to you. If there's anything that can be done, I'm here for you, and I'm happy to have a conversation anytime. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap this up. I know many of you have meetings to go to. So that's it from us. Have a great day, and I hope we'll chat soon. Thank you. Bye.